Welcome to the Genealogy Guidepost series. I'm Bill Buckner, supervisor of the Genealogy Center, and today I will be joined by Hannah Kabachuk, genealogy librarian. This series will cover the elements of the genealogical proof standard. The standard is a guideline for us for establishing the reliability, i.e. the proofs, of a genealogical conclusion with reasonable certainty. Some feel it's the minimum steps that are needed to form such a conclusion. So let's talk about the first element, an exhaustive search. What did we mean by an exhaustive search? Well, first of all, you should always familiarize yourself with all available resources in all formats, either online, print, and archival, personal records, governmental, cemetery, church, etc., in a variety of formats, and find where the records are now. Are they in the local area, at the local town courthouse, or are they in the state archive, or are they in a national archive? And also to learn about the historical content when your ancestor lived. What records, what things impacted, what events impacted their lives. It's very important to understand that. Think about research checklists. Now, where do you get these checklists? There are a variety of checklists on the internet in book form, but it's basically a list of records of all types that you might have access to or that might have recorded information about your ancestor. So review these checklists for every ancestor that you research, and don't overlook a resource. You never know what information you might find. Always just think in terms of, do I have access to it? And if not, then try to get access. What resource might be in your home with a family member? And then look for clues. Create a surname log. Very important first step in the beginner's class is to start collecting variations of the surname, but also first names. How many people went by their middle name that you found out maybe at a funeral that they went by their middle name their whole lives? So start thinking about first names, middle names, and last names, and how to search those systematically. We'll talk about that more in a little bit, but systematically all the variations each time you search a database, a book, or any other resource. Let's talk a second about the research cycle. Research is not linear. It feeds itself actually. So identify what you already know, determine what you want to know, and select records to search, obtain and search the record, and then use that information. As you review that information, you want to then once again identify what you know and keep following the cycle. Each time you find a new fact, reevaluate it with others, and each record should start to lead you to other records. That's our rule of thumb. And be systematic. Follow the research cycle for each question you ask. Review the checklist for every ancestor you research. Search all name variations in every source used. And a reasonably exhaustive search requires diligent research. When you search an index in a book, be systematic and search through every surname variation, every first name variation that you can think of and find and record this information so you know that you did the search at some point in time. Now, sometimes we feel like we're searching under a rock trying to find information that we know it's there, but we just can't seem to find it. So I can't find them in the census. So here are some search strategies to help you find your ancestors under a rock. View all available transcriptions of original documents. Even though you have access to the census, review all census transcriptions from Ancestry, from Family Search in book form. Anytime there's a transcription, the transcriber may have done a better job than the people at a database. So check a print inventory of the census. Every transcriber might be different. So in this case, we're looking for a PD Rockmore, and we find him in the 1900 census in Panola County. And the 1900 census on Ancestry The transcribers transcribed Rockmore as Rugmond instead of Rockmore. And you can see that here. I can't find them in the census. Well, look for the households of every child and siblings. So not just the parent to the parent, the relationship of that, but to search every single child within a family so that you can find possibly where the family parents, parents went, or the grandparents. It was typical that parents and grandparents lived or moved in with children or even grandchildren in their later years. A widow might move in with a relative after the death of her husband. Browse the pages where they should be living. If you know they're in one census and then 20 years later, they're still in the same area, then you need to be searching the census in between in that same area, just page by page and looking for them. You also want to use the fan approach of their neighbors, looking at neighbors, where did they live, and then search out the neighbors to see if you can find them close to your ancestor, close to those neighbors. So in this case, we have family members of how the ancestry transcribed the name and then how the actual transcription of the name should have been. This is my family, T.A. Buckner. Be aware that families were recorded multiple times in any given census year. This is because you were moving, they were students, they had temporary living arrangements. So in any census, you might find your ancestor listed more than once, twice. And so the information may be exactly the same. In this case, the date there when they were married is a little bit different, or the age is different. And so be aware that sometimes the information may be a little different and you might pick up additional fact. All right, so let's change to birth and death certificates. So you have to realize that birth and death by each state started at different times. They didn't always start the same. So in Texas, our benchmark is 1903 when the state required. Counties, the last point there is that counties were not compliant with the state requirement at the same time. And so you almost have to do a look at the records themselves, call the local library, or historical society, or genealogy society to see if anybody understands when that county became compliant. You also want to look and see if you can browse those records instead of just searching them by an index. Also, you want to look at, if you know the date of birth and you can't find them by the name, then just to put in the date of birth, the year and the month and the date, and then troll through the results to see if your ancestor shows up with the misspelling. In this case, we're looking at the date, and then we're looking at this Grobusky, which should be Grohosky. And so if a child's name was left blank on the certificate, that happens a lot. They hadn't named the child yet, and so it was blank. The father's name might be misspelled, and so be looking at you just having to troll through all the various certificates for a particular date and possibly find them that way. A delayed or probated birth record might have been filed if you don't find a certificate at all, that you might want to look. And Family Search has these for Texas under Texas Births and Christenings, 1840 to 1981. You also might check with the county clerk. If they had Social Security, it's a good thought that they probably had a delayed birth record, because you would have to prove to Social Security when you were actually born, and you do that through a delayed birth record. Also, there are documents that link one generation to another. In this case, there might be a census, like a scholastic census, that has the child with their date of birth listing the parents' names. what are some of the other ones that we typically see? Obituaries, birth, death certificates, wills and probate, some marriage records. Some states ask the parents' names, wedding announcements, federal census, 1880 and later, the family Bible, and personal papers. So here's a marriage record listing the names of those getting married plus the names of the parents. And so that's a great find when you have that kind of information. Also look for, when you can't find the parents' names, sometimes it can't be directly documented. This person is the son or daughter of this person, this parent, this mother and father. Sometimes you have to take a route around that. So maybe if you have multiple siblings, you can search out the siblings to see if you can find records that list their parent who is a parent of your ancestor. And then if you have proof of the relationship between your ancestor and one of their siblings, that would be enough information to justify that this is their parent.
My name is Hannah, and I am the genealogy librarian, and I'm going to start by talking with you about alternative sources. So if you're struggling to find a document, sometimes it's helpful to ask what other sources might contain the same information, because our ancestors had lots of documents throughout their lives that were used that recorded the same type of information. And even if you find something like a birth certificate, that doesn't mean you shouldn't look for these other records. These are all things that you really should be looking for every ancestor anyway. Just know that sometimes to find a birth date, you don't necessarily need a birth certificate, as one may not be available. So for death dates, you can look at things like headstones, obituaries, Social Security death index, wills, or probates. For birth information, you can look at christening records, Social Security claims index, a family Bible, and birth announcements. And these are just a few examples. There's lots of other resources to find this type of information. Sometimes, as you find multiple records that contain the same type of information, you'll find conflicting details. So in this example, we have information for Effie Mae Baker Dickey, and she has the 1900 census, her headstone, her Social Security death index, and her delayed birth record all list a different date of birth for her. In part 3 of the series, we'll talk more about resolving evidence discrepancies to learn techniques for analyzing this conflicting information. But this is an example of why it's so important to make sure you really are leaving no stone unturned and looking for every different type of record that's going to contain the information you're looking for. It's also important to research the historical context of your ancestor's life and to learn more about the time period, the organizations they were involved in, the communities they lived in, and all of the different elements of their life. Some good places to do this are in historic newspapers. So by reading the newspaper of the town that your ancestor lived in, you get an idea of the type of things that they were reading and hearing about on a daily basis, and the type of local events that would have impacted their life. You can also use history books. So here's a few different types of history books to use. So aside from just community histories, you can also read about the history of organizations, about different migrations or immigration movements, about schools or events, different places, different ethnic groups, different churches. These are all common types of history books that you can find, many of which we do have in our collection. You can also find historic maps. These can help you visualize the community of your ancestor and understand the relationship between places. The Waco, Texas of 1886 looked very different from the Waco, Texas of 2022. And so being able to visually see what the community would have looked like, what types of buildings were there, what buildings were there that are no longer present, can help you better understand the community of your ancestor. The fan method is a strategy developed by Elizabeth Shown Mills. FAN stands for friends, associates, and neighbors. These are people who would have affected your ancestor's life because your ancestor knew more people than just their family members. And so learning about the other people in their life can oftentimes lead you to new clues to learn more about your ancestor's life. So for example, who did they go to school with? Here's a class photo of the Clayton School around 1908 and names of many of the students identified in the photo. These are individuals who all would have known each other, and their descendants may have more information about the community or photos that you would like to have access to. So researching the people who impacted your ancestor's life can be a great way to find additional information. An exhaustive search really requires that you go beyond the basics. It's more than finding vital records and identifying the names of children. It's building a full picture of your ancestor's life. And you have to use more than online resources. So we're going to take a look at some examples of different types of records that you can use to show what creating an exhaustive search might look like. Newspapers can be an important source. They're a way that you can find photos, information about local gossip, major events, personal events, community news, advertisements, and more. And while many newspapers are available online, many more are only available through microfilm or through physical clippings that were made. So for example, here on the left, we have an obituary. This obituary is from the Panola Watchman from 1924, and this particular paper is only available through microfilm. And then on the right is the Long Branch Hustler. This was an even smaller paper, and the only issue that still exists of this paper is the bicentennial edition, which shared many historic photos and community history pieces, and it's not available online or through microfilm. The only copies are physical copies that were saved by members in the community. Heirlooms can also be a great source for finding additional clues about your ancestor's life. Is there a dusty box somewhere in your house full of family items that you don't know what to do with? Check them for family history clues. You never know what you might find. What's been passed down through the family that might give you a clue to your ancestor's life. And reach out to other branches of the family to see what may still exist. Your cousin may have an old scrapbook or other items that could provide clues for your ancestor's life. So here's a Masonic apron that belonged to J.L. Rockmore, and it has information about what lodge he was a member of. And this is something that was passed down through the family. Church records may also provide insight into your ancestor's life. Oftentimes they contain more than just marriages and baptisms. Did your ancestor make donations to the church or teach Sunday school? Here's a record from the Mount Hebron Baptist Church that lists J.L. Rockmore as someone who was subscribing to pay for the pastor's salary. So he was making a regular monthly donation to help support the pastor coming to their church. And you're able to compare the amount that different people in the community were able to pay, which may give you a clue as to the socioeconomic status of different members of that community. And these records were accessed through the Texas Baptist Institute and Seminary. Community histories can also provide important context. It can help you know what schools existed at that time, what churches were established, what types of businesses were in that town, and what events affected their daily life. Many of these will also include photos. While it's always nice to find a photo of our ancestors, sometimes it's also nice to find photos of physical landmarks like businesses, homes, churches, or schools, because these are things that our ancestors would have seen on a daily basis that may no longer be standing. For example, this Long Branch School, which was built in about 1909. The building is no longer there, but this would have been a staple in the community, a landmark that everyone would have recognized who was living there at that time. Other school records might include information from the Scholastic Census, yearbooks, diplomas, photos, and more. So here we have a medical school diploma. This again was another heirloom that was passed down through the family. And then finding this diploma gave a clue for what school he had attended. By contacting that university's archives, I was able to find a register of students, which gave additional information. If your ancestor owned a business, looking for information about that business can also be helpful. So there might be advertisements in newspapers or city directories, other documents such as ledgers, pay stubs. And don't underestimate the value of an eBay search. Search the name of the business on Google or in a database like eBay and see if anything pops up. Here are some checks written from the Dr. J.L. Rockmore and Sons business by Dr. Rockmore's son, William Rockmore. And these were received from someone who lived in that community who collected local history items. You can also find additional information through oral histories. This is a great way to collect personal details that aren't going to be found in other records. Potential people to interview are family members, community members, church members, and family friends. Think of all of the different organizations that your ancestor would have been a part of and who might have known them through those channels. These people might also have things like newspaper clippings or other items that can provide added insight into your family's life. So where should you conduct your research? Many people start online using things like databases, search engines, family trees, and message boards. These are all great resources. You should also extend your search to other places such as libraries. This might include public or academic libraries, maps, books, vertical files, microfilm, and family history are all things that you might find in a library that can provide additional information. Archives, such as state archives, county, or museums, also provide resources such as vertical files, documents, personal papers, letters, diaries, and so much more. A large amount of information also exists in private collections. So either things that are passed down through the family or things that are held by people who collect specific types of memorabilia or items. So think about family heirlooms, letters, diaries, personal papers, photo albums, scrapbooks, Bibles, family histories. These are all things that you might find in a private collection by reaching out to different individuals connected to the family or the community. So as you complete your exhaustive searches, remember these research strategies. You want to utilize a variety of sources. You want to research the historical context of your ancestor's life. Use a research checklist. There's always more information to find. And be systematic in your searches to make sure you aren't leaving any stone unturned. If you have any questions, we're here to help. You can reach us at the Waco Genealogy Center. We're located at 5301 Bosque Boulevard, or you can give us a call at 254-750-5945. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in part 2.